And we see this settler history of self-defense. It's part of the colonial project. Again, it's part of the colonial discourse. And we see it in the United States when it said that it was defending itself against the indigenous people of the plains. They used that term, defending itself. France said it was self-defense when it was killing Algerians in Algeria. The Britons said they were using defense while torturing Kenyans in the 1950s.
Words are the cheapest and most underestimated weapon in modern power politics. They shape perception, manufacture consent, and they louder violence into something that sounds completely rational or even moral. In the hands of skilled actors like politicians, intelligence agencies, and of course corporate PR teams, language becomes an instrument of behavioral steering, embedding narratives that individuals absorb unconsciously, that professionals repeat automatically, and that entire states internalize as common sense. Just look at how euphemisms like collateral damage or surgical strike virtually anesthetizes the public, or how ideological framing transforms aggression into a right for self-defense, censorship into safety, and economic coercion into stability. But propaganda is rarely blunt, by design. It is semantic engineering, subtle shifts in vocabulary, tone, and framing that distort reality while pretending to describe it. In fact, the entire aim of propaganda is to operate below the subject's threshold of detection. That's the point. Its power depends on being mistaken for someone's own thoughts. It's really brilliant. And because especially democratic societies chronologically underestimate the strategic power of words, and I'm keeping repeating this, they remain vulnerable to manipulation by actors who do understand that control over language is control over thought and ultimately over political outcomes. I'll be diving into all of this with my guest today, Dr. Susan Jakob. How language becomes the quiet architecture of power. How propaganda works precisely because it hides in plain sight, and how political actors use words to shape what whole societies perceive as reality. It's a conversation meant to expose the machinery beneath the messaging, not just describe it. If the machinery of propaganda fascinates you, not as theory but as something shaping your daily reality, then come join me on Substack. Not for content, but for the kind of analysis that sharpens your ability to see power before it actually reaches you. Exposés that don't flatter institutions, frameworks that expose linguistic manipulation, and investigations built for people who refuse to live inside someone else's narrative. So, got a pen ready? Here we go. Susan Jakob, what a pleasure having you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Thomas. The pleasure is all mine.
It's now lunchtime for you in Ontario. By us, it's dark, and we had the first snow of the year just right now here in the Netherlands. How is it in Ontario?
It is definitely icy.
I see. Okay, Susan. To start with, maybe you tell us a little bit about your background and why you're here.
So I have a PhD in education where I specialized in critical and political discourse analysis. And so today I'm hoping to provide some insights and analysis into some of the Zionist discourses that we hear in the political sphere of the Middle East these days. My background is that I'm a Canadian born and raised academic. I was a former professor, and my heritage is from Haifa, Palestine.
That explains also the focus area of your study, to which we come back later. But you are modest. You have more than just a PhD. Tell us.
Yeah, I also have a Bachelor of Education, a Master's in Psychology with a focus on education as well. So yeah, I'm a lifelong learner, you could say.
Okay. And what brought you into linguistics?
I've always been fascinated about how language can shape our thoughts and then eventually shape our actions and our beliefs. And I'm also interested in how uncovering certain tropes and like language manipulation can not only be a mechanism of control, but also one of liberation.
This is a very valid point. People vastly underestimate the power of words, especially if we talk about the subconscious power of words, the framing, etc., and how this is used by spin doctors, politicians, and the PR industry, right?
Absolutely.
Now, I have read your thesis. I saw Teun van Dijk, which you reference heavy in your thesis. For my own academic research, of course, I also drew on his work. In fact, I saw that he's still alive. He's living in Spain. I have his email address, and actually, I will reach out to him for an interview.
Wow.
What makes him interesting, and this is also, I think, why you chose him, is because his academic work can be applied linea recta onto political narrative or discourse. Please.
That's precisely the reason. I wanted a discourse analysis that could really highlight ideologies that would otherwise go hidden. And so I found his work to embed within it a methodology, but also a critical lens that was not, let's say, married or constricted to any let's say, left-right spectrum. Like it could be applied across the spectrum. And so that was why I chose him. I found him to be very thorough and fascinating.
In a world where propaganda is omnipresent, I mean, you know, when the geopolitical tensions rise, then propaganda is equally on the rise. Yeah? And I have discussed this most recently with Dr. Piers Robinson, a very interesting interview. I've published a couple of items on this, both on YouTube and on Substack. Lately, I analyzed some headlines, partly also based on Teun van Dijk. But again, I don't want to make this too academic today for our viewers, but I think two main things. Generally, the power of word is massively underestimated. And second, we have to find a way how to counter propaganda, right? And propaganda, I mean, people think, you know, the Second World War, Goebbels, whatever. No, propaganda comes from the nephew of Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, in the US, right? Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit.
Well, yeah, absolutely. The thing about all psychological or cognitive warfare, like you'd like to call it, is that it evolves with technology. So it's a type of technology itself. And so if we continue to look back at World War II propaganda and say, well, that's not what's happening now, then you're missing the point. It's because once one method is used and uncovered and displayed, they move on to a new way. And that's one of the reasons they do data mining for the internet, is to see what is trending, how are the people speaking, especially the dissidents. And then what they do is they co-opt your language. And so when you hear one of the elites using the same tropes or language that you're using, you get excited and you think, okay, they're making the same changes that I've made, when really they're just manipulating you because they want you to follow in their suit, or, you know, have trust in them again, right? To rebuild that trust. So yeah, definitely the propaganda has moved over to Western discourse and Western ways of knowing and doing. And so it's something we definitely should be aware of.
When we talk about propaganda in the context of, say, Russia or China or North Korea, then the people there, of course, they know, you know, that the information that they're getting from the state is flawed. But here in the West, of course, we live in this illusion of, you know, free speech, free will, and you know, objective mainstream media. I mean, this illusion goes, you know, step by step. They're losing. I saw a Pew study. I think they went down to 28% in the US, and there was a recent Pew study. Yeah, so people are slowly waking up in regards to, But you just said something interesting, to match the language of the adressee. I'm sure you know the Cambridge Analytica scandal from a way past, no? Cambridge Analytica was a intelligence company. They scraped Facebook for I don't know how many million, I think 40 million users, and then micro-targeted them in the run-up of Trump's 2016 elections. And this is where what you just said comes in, because micro-targeting means you get a completely different message than I, based on the cyber profile that they already have collected. Yeah? And this is where language comes in, because not only that, they also adjust their language when they're talking with you, and their tricks in order to create rapport, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you reminded me of something. So my husband lives overseas. And, so when I try to look at, let's say Al Jazeera, I'm obviously looking at Al Jazeera English. And when he is watching Al Jazeera, not that we, think Al Jazeera is not a Western imperialist arm, of course it is. But, you watch it just to see what's going on in the mainstream. Anyhow, so he watches Al Jazeera in Arabic. And then there was a few weeks ago, I think it was the PM of Qatar, he came out and he was on Al Jazeera English, and he was speaking English, and he said, Hamas broke the ceasefire or something like that. And, me and a whole bunch of people in the comments were like, are you out of your mind? It was Israel. And then so when I told my husband, I said, doesn't this enrage you? And he said, no, I watched that interview. He didn't say that. He said, Israel broke the ceasefire. And so when you watch it in Arabic, he says, in Arabic, Israel broke the ceasefire. And in English, he says, Hamas broke the ceasefire. And so this is, exactly to your point, where they tailor and they micro-target people. And so they can get people from, disparate parts of the political sphere to engage with them and to believe in what they have to say.
I think you already answered my question, because I was surprised to hear that you said, Al Jazeera English is a kind of arm of the West.
Yes.
Absolutely. Whilst when was it? They even considered or did bomb Al Jazeera offices, so that surprised me a bit. But I think you already explained it. There's a difference between Arabic and English.
Definitely. And, at the end of the day, Qatar is very controlled by the U.S. too. And so there are different roles that each country that's controlled by the West has to play, and that's to placate their population. So the Western imperial has many masks, right? The imperial state has many masks that it wears, and Qatar wears a certain mask.
Before we dive into this, I was just interested to hear from you. How is it to live with a Palestinian background in Canada?
For me, I love being Palestinian. I feel like it matches my rebel personality. So, it ties in really well with me. Is there discrimination? Absolutely. A couple of years ago, I was a director of an international corporation, and I got the job October 2nd. 2023, and then October 7th happened, and I told my husband I'm going to lose my job. And I did. I lost it about 6 weeks later, and the CEO told me, she's like, I found out you're Palestinian, and that was the end of it. Now, I did sue them. I did win. So there's always that light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, there's definitely discrimination. But, Canada is a place where you're going to find a multitude of voices, and you can find your niche and you can find your people. So, overall, it's happy. I've lived in other places and the discrimination is the same. So, this is home.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the general sentiment. Here in the Netherlands, I think it was last year, we had this Israeli Maccabi football fans here, and they were basically chasing down the locals. And it was turned around in the global media. There's a pogrom in Amsterdam, and even the mayor of Amsterdam used the word pogrom. Only later she had to kind of, make a U-turn. So I was wondering, the overall sentiment in Canada vis-a-vis the Israel-Palestine conflict, which Netanyahu calls the Palestine-Israel conflict, talking about words. How is the overall sentiment?
So in where I live, it's super Zionist. Okay, I live in a very Western imperial. I'm not going to say where it is, but if you knew the name of where I live, then you would know. So, it's tough. Like you lose your job if you don't, condemn Hamas every second of the day and, grovel, to your Zionist masters if you are Palestinian, or you just have to say that you're Lebanese, or, you know what I mean? But if you say you're Palestinian, yeah, you're going to have some pushback from, let's say, academia for sure. Because, I think at our university, it's almost 80% funded by Zionist organization. So, there's definitely discrimination. There's no question, but, you go in, you do your good work, and you kind of keep your head down and try not to get into any kind of political speeches or anything like that at your work, and you should be fine. I mean, not that it's fair, obviously, because everyone else is talking about elections and politics. But that's one thing that I've learned as a Palestinian in the diaspora, is that there are certain things that you can't say without having consequences. And so you always have to evaluate the risks, and even just engaging in any kind of opinion, or how do I come across? Am I coming off across as a radical, or, I'll tell you one more thing, because I know I'm rambling, but I'll tell you one more thing. I noticed that when you're Palestinian, or probably even if you're anything other than white, everything that you say or any experience you have is because you're Palestinian. You don't have any individuality. You don't have a personality. Your parents didn't have a personality. Oh, is that how you grew up? Oh, what culture is that? Oh, that's interesting. What culture is that? Like, it was just my family. Right? It's like every family is different. Now, is there something that we all share? Sure, of course. But they erase your individuality, they erase your personality. And so it comes to the point where, like, you just don't even feel comfortable sometimes to engage in personal conversations just with anyone. You kind of have to test the waters before you, make those deeper connections, or even feel safe enough to speak freely.
Okay. You said you are former professor. Care to elaborate? Why former?
Yeah, so I was teaching at the university for over 8 years, primarily in the Department of Education, where I focused on literacy studies, multiliteracies, literacy as a currency, and how it affects marginalized communities, and how different communities even define literacy and act it out in social practice. I also taught in the biology department for 3 years. That was my stint in academia. I've published a few articles in international journals, as well as being the leading author on the World Encyclopedia of Education in Canada. So it was fun while it lasted. However, for me, being a professor with my radical ideas, it was too much of going against the grain. So I'm happy to have moved on from that. I enjoyed my time. I loved my students, and now a new chapter.
Okay. Anything? I mean, I don't want to dig too much into this, but you went just out of your free own will, or something happened?
Oh no, just out of my free will.
Okay, very good. I'm asking. I mean, I had a number of academics. One of which I would like to mention, Professor Nurit Peled-Erhanan. I'm sure you know her because she investigated. Yep. She did research on racism in Israeli school books, and her words, she described the pornography of evil in Israeli school books. Her words, not mine. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, nothing happened to you. You chose your own path. Which is leading you now where? The last.
So right now I'm the lead curriculum designer and developer for a national organization that focuses on indigenous wellness.
Okay, and there is a point to be made. I had a management training in Manchester a couple of years ago, and there was a lady from Canada, and she told me the story about the disappearing girls in Canada. They just disappear and nobody cares. And after a while, not so long ago, she wrote me that she had to stop because the emotional toll on her was just too great. Right? So apparently girls disappear I should be more specific, indigenous girls disappear in Canada, and apparently the local system, police, whatever, they don't really care. They just dig out bodies so now and then.
Yeah, it's very sad. So it's called MMIW, so Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. And it is a movement, and it's very real. Every year, there are hundreds of women that disappear off the reserves. Oh, yeah. Off the reserves, or they show up mysteriously dead. And yes, trying to get an investigation into the disappearance or the deaths of these women on reserves is very difficult. And it's very challenging and very, of course, as your colleague mentioned, it takes an emotional toll on you. So even in the work that I do, it's very difficult to see how cut off some of these reserves are from wellness and hospitals and those sort of facilities to get the assistance that they need. Sometimes even 911 or the equivalent is an hour away. In the winter, you're looking at helicopters having to come in because of the ice roads and whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely an unfortunate issue, but definitely related to the discourse of colonization for today as well.
Great gateway discourse. So I have to see what we already covered. So I read your thesis, you sent me a thesis, and you also sent me an article which I have in front of me. I read both with great interest. I found a name that I knew from my own academic research, that's Teun van Dijk. I believe he is Dutch, but he lives in Spain, I figured out, and I will reach out to him for an interview. But what his research specifically focuses on is discourse in political context, and that's what makes him interesting for me, but also for you. One last thing before I hand the microphone to you. You and me, we discussed this before. We tried to keep this, how shall I say this, non-academic discussion. However, there is absolute value in the simple knowledge. This is not something you have to study. You have to be aware of it, how
Yes.
deep words can affect you on a subconscious level, and how much it's used in propaganda, in spin doctors, in PR, in politics, etc., etc. So that's basically the overall frame of our little discussion here. And I'm very happy because you are way more advanced on that topic than I am. So where would you like to start?
Yeah, so what I would like to do is I'll give a really quick overview of the methodology, and then I'll get into 5 Zionist double-speak words that we're all familiar with, and I'll break it down how it works socially, psychologically, and politically. How's
Yes, and I have
All
a
right.
6th one. Once you're done, I have one that I didn't find on your list at the end. Please.
Okay. You're testing me, Thomas. I like it. All right. So the 5 words that we're going to talk about today are deradicalization, the term Israeli Arab, two-state solution, and I'm going to tie it in with the recent conundrum at the UN and the whole idea of a stabilisation force. Number 4, Israel has the right to defend itself. And then number 5, Israel's right to exist. Number 6, Thomas's surprise at the end. All right, so as you mentioned, we're talking about Van Dijk, and we're going to be using his critical discourse analysis. And I really love it because it talks about how language is used to produce power and to legitimize power. And that is especially the case when we look at racial relations, politics, and especially we're going to talk about colonial power. So the main point of it, and this is what I find so interesting, is that power does not have to dominate through violence. Power can dominate through words. And that's where critical discourse analysis comes in. It's controlling the mind and controlling your actions.
May I interject one little thing?
Of course.
Power, keyword power. Now, President Nixon, as we all know, taped the recordings in the White House, which caused Donald Trump to say a couple of times, why did he not burn the tapes? Which is an indicator what Donald Trump wants to do. But there is, of course, the discussion between President Nixon and his 2 chief of staffs, and these discussions, they were analyzed on power structure, so on linguistic power cues. And what was clear to see that at the beginning of the Watergate scandal, President Nixon was clearly in charge in his narrative, in his speech, in his writing. And the further he got entangled in this scandal, the power dominance shifted, and at the end there was, of course, the dominance from the chief of staffs vis-a-vis President Nixon. What makes this interesting is Nixon was not the only president who taped the White House. John F. Kennedy did too, which is why we have the recordings and the documents where he had his exchanges between Ben-Gurion and John F. Kennedy, where Ben-Gurion lied to him consistently about the Dimona reactor. No, this is gonna peaceful, yeah. And I have those communications, and I'm analyzing them based on those power cues in regards to their discussions. So who was actually, dominant in power? Was it Ben-Gurion or was it John F. Kennedy? That was the keyword power. But back to you.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I should take a look at that. So Van Dyke argues that discourse affects us in three ways. So in the language that we use, in our social practice, and in our cognition. So I should say it in the other way. So language affects your cognition, and that affects our social practice. And by social practice, we mean how we act, the policies that we vote for, and basically the institutions that we build.
And with cognition, you mean?
Our shared beliefs, how we think of things, how we create mental models, how we connect one idea to the other. So when we want to, for example, engage in something, with sympathy, then we're going to relate it to something that we already have sympathy for. Yeah. So if I could say very briefly, discourse, for example, if you hear in the news, these neighborhoods are dangerous. That's the discourse. Your cognition is when you hear it, oh, those people in that neighborhood are dangerous or they're criminals, right? Why else is the neighborhood dangerous? And then, so as a society and social practice, perhaps you request increased policing, perhaps landlords start raising their rent, maybe banks will deny you loans because you're from a certain neighborhood. So these are all types of social practice that is derived from the discourse itself.
We should maybe add one thing. The endless repetition, and my prime example is always Palestinian terrorists, Palestinian terrorists, Palestinian terrorists. The last 40 years of my life, I heard Palestinian terrorists. This goes in your subconscious if you want it or not. It builds physical structures in the brain, neuron path, which connects, cognitive biases, which are very fast, but sometimes very wrong. But this is very direct on. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that they do is if you're first to make a statement, that statement sticks in your mind the most. Yeah, exactly. And I remember on 9/11, the first statement that came out of Israel's mouth was the Palestinians who did 9/11. And I remember I was in high school and I was so irate that somebody had mentioned that in class. And I said, how did the people in Palestine do it? They're under siege. They can't even take a plane out of Palestine.
Do you know that according to Netanyahu, the Palestinians are responsible for the Holocaust? I kid you not. Netanyahu said Hitler met the Mufti from Jerusalem. Netanyahu said Hitler did not want to kill the Jews, so he asked the Mufti from Jerusalem, "What shall I do with them?" And the Mufti told Hitler, "Kill them." I kid you not. This comes out of Netanyahu's mouth.
So it's never a European problem, right? So that's actually a good point. So that's the number 2 point that I wanted to make, actually, was managing the minds of others. And it's, for example, laying blame, right? So we shape public memory. We define who's always innocent and who's always dangerous. And when we do that, the way Netanyahu is doing is it normalizes the dominance. Like, Europeans can never do wrong, even if they're settler colonizers, even if they're committing a genocide, it's always somebody else's fault. In fact, Jeffrey Sachs has an article where he says, it's Hamas is responsible for the genocide. He didn't say that exactly, but if I read between the words, because, and now this is what he said, they provoked Israel. They provoked Israel into a genocide. So it's never a European problem. And so this is, again, when we talk about discourse, it's to justify violence, and it's to erase any alternative perspective. And so this is when you say, for example, repetition, when you use familiar phrases that people already use in their day-to-day life. So, if you're trying to communicate, and a lot of people in the Palestinian movement, they will use a lot of Arabic words or use Arabic accents because they want to preserve certain things. But like for somebody who is not in that movement, it's very difficult to follow along. And it's a lot easier to follow along with a Zionist discourse that's speaking your accent, that's using familiar phrases and metaphors that, are part of the society. So yeah, the way the words work is that they position who's good and who's bad from the get-go.
I interviewed Jeffrey Sachs a while back, but about Ukraine, where he had a very lucid view. I mean, for him it's clear. I mean, NATO expansion, blah, blah, blah. He's also very clear who blew up the Nord Stream, the Americans. Yeah. I did not talk about Palestine with him, but I did a piece exploring the psychological mechanisms behind people like that, who have a very lucid view, let's say, on Ukraine, and a very flawed view on Israel, or the other way around. In fact, I had a high-ranking military telling me he cannot join me for an interview because we are not eye to eye on Israel Palestine. So this is, the same psychological mechanisms work, and we make often the mistake, we think this person is good here or he's right there. He has to be right everywhere, right? Okay.
Well, yeah, that's when the personal biases come in and your vested interest comes in, and also the exceptionalism that has unfortunately arisen around Zionism and Judaism, where you feel like, oh, I can't. True thing. When I was talking about the genocide about a year ago to my coworker, she said, "Oh my God, that sounds a lot like," and she's Jewish, by the way. She goes, "That sounds a lot like." Oh, never mind. I shouldn't say it. I said, "The Holocaust." She goes, "Yeah. Are we allowed to say that? Are we allowed to say that this sounds like the Holocaust?" So yeah, there's this exceptionalism too, unfortunately.
And they don't.
Anyhow,
there's another Holocaust. There are more Holocausts. Let's talk about the Armenians, Turkey. So Israel does not. Also, the Jews don't have a monopoly on Holocaust. There was before and after.
Yep. But somehow they have, as you said, like a monopoly on the term.
They put a patent on it. It's ours.
That's precisely it. So again, just to briefly go over, so Van Dyke says that ideology is hidden in the way we speak. And so when we say Israel has the right to defend itself, there is an ideology hidden under there. And so that's what I'm hoping to expose today. And so the way we do that is by macro analysis and micro analysis. So on the micro or the small scale, we're going to look at words, metaphors, headlines, pronouns, the tone that you use, the syntax that you use. So it's very grammar and granular. On the macro, or the large scale, we're going to look at the political narratives at large. We're going to look at national myths. We're going to look at dominant ideologies, global power structures, cultural norms, and most importantly, patterns. Because I know a lot of people, they get excited about discourse analysis, and then so someone said this word, therefore they must be. No, you need to look at the micro, the macro, and then you need to look at patterns. And so it's not as easy as people might wish it was.
And before you continue, I think we should notice one thing for the viewers. We go through a little bit of, let's say, theory, but you will show exactly how you can apply this. And again, the knowledge alone is empowerment, because you can apply this linear rector to your next conversation, to your next article, whatever. Yeah, I think that's really worth highlighting. It's a bit theory at the beginning, but we will get practical.
100%. All right, so now that we know a little bit about CDA, so critical discourse analysis, our goal is to find out how these phrases and terms work politically, socially, and psychologically, and then we're going to think about how we can protect ourselves from these words. So the first one that we're going to talk about is deradicalization. So we hear the UN saying that we need to de-radicalize the Palestinians or the Trump peace plan. Part of the 20 points is de-radicalization. So what do they mean by this? Well, it means neutering people so that they agree to being enslaved. To say, I give up on my autonomy, I give up on my human rights, and I agree to live a certain way under your supervision so that I can stay on this land. And if I don't agree to it, then, as Trump says, all hell will break loose. And we have historical examples of this. So this is not something that comes out of, my hat. So the British actually used this term deradicalization in the 1950s for the Mau Mau in Kenya. So this example shows us how deradicalization is a euphemism for political neutering. It is a tool for re-educating. So telling people how to think, telling people a new ontology. What is reality? Telling them the way they think, the way they feel is invalid. You have been mistaken. It's a very much a gaslighting technique.
It presupposes,
and of course,
it presupposes that there is radicalization, and it implies it's unjustified radicalization, right?
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head right there. And so it's a way really to pacify anti-colonial resistance. And so they see, as you said, radicalization as resistance. So if you are not okay with being enslaved, this is a radical idea. This is how they position it to the world. So if we look at Kenya during the 1950s, there was a Mau Mau movement, and they were, of course, against the British colonial land theft and the racial discrimination. And so the British labeled the Mau Mau fighters as, surprise, surprise, terrorists, fanatics, and mentally deranged. And then they built massive detention camps, which are re-education centers, right, to de-radicalize people. And unfortunately, this is the exact language that we're seeing today.
If I may, I interviewed Professor Omar Bartov, and he told me, because you said mentally deranged, this is dehumanization. So he told me that, again, very black and white, there is a trajectory direction genocide. And the first step is dehumanization. You need that. The second stage is then ethnic cleansing, and then he said, if you can't get rid of them, you kill them. So dehumanization, this, they are subhumans, they're like cockroaches, they're like this kind of stuff, is essential in order to form kind of the sentiment within their own population in order to make these kind of things happen.
Absolutely. And how do you do that? You do it with discourse. And so once they are able to convince you that you need this de-radicalization, and of course you're not going to convince people, you're going to implement it against people's will, and as you said, very violently, what they can do is they can gain control, of the public that are outside looking in, but eventually the people who are in the re-education camps, they get weared down. And so now you can get a control of their minds too. And if we look at different parts of the world, for example, Jordan, you see that there is a lot of love for the monarchy, despite the monarchy being the reason for their oppression, right? And this comes down to propaganda, having, the nanny state, government loves you, daddy loves you, that sort of thing. And so, yes, unfortunately, it's not just something for the external population that is outside of the colonial issue, but it also affects the people within as well.
I've been in Jordan a couple of times. I interviewed the former foreign minister, Dr. Marwan Marsha. Incredible mind, but they're in a really tricky position.
Yes.
I interviewed a senator, 4 senators actually, but one of them was very picky on how many Palestinians actually live in Jordan. Yeah? So of the officials, they all tried to put the numbers down. Yeah? So he said something just below 40%, whilst I know it's higher than that. Right? It's a very tricky proposition.
I'm not sure how many anymore because of all the Syrian and Iraqi refugees. Yeah, it's hard to say, but maybe I would probably put it at 50%.
You're right. Maybe I should have been more specific. I was wrong. Refugees, not necessarily only Palestinians.
Refugees, right.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Sorry. No, you're right. Yeah. That makes sense. Yep. But yeah, at one point there was definitely a vast majority of them who were Palestinians for sure. So what would happen in these re-education camps or these de-radicalization camps? Forced confessions, torture, and of course the torture is as behavioral rehabilitation. all right, how to get you to behave. And if you listen to Trump, you hear him say, oh, Hamas promised me they're going to behave, right? He has this language down pat. Religious training. And so that's another thing that was in the Trump peace plan, where they said there would be interfaith dialogue, like as if that's ever an issue. I mean, Palestine and Palestinians, that's the home of Judaism and Christianity. And now there's a large Muslim population. So they have no, they don't have any like need for demystifying religion. They are very well aware of religion. It's not a religious issue. But of course, they're going to come and say, well, if you're a pious person, then, and then they start telling you all the enslavement things that you need to do in order for God to love you, for God to forgive you, so on and so forth. And we've seen this, unfortunately, in the education or the residential schooling on Turtle Island, for example, in Canada and America with the indigenous populations. All right, so this, of course, they say it as the benefit of the people, right? It's a therapy, it's a healing.
You just said religion. I interviewed Emeritus Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. He lives in the US.
Oh, yes. I love him. He's great.
Spits fire. And I had 2 or 3 interviews with him, but I think the last one was about, it was in concession of the interview, also from Nurit Pelet. She looks at, early, after the kindergarten, also really early school books. And he then went and analyzed the texts, the religious texts that the Israeli army used in order to further indoctrinate the young soldiers. Yeah? And the one statement that I have quoted many times in a couple of interviews from Emeritus Yaakov Shapiro, he said, Zionism is burning Jews for fuel. Yeah?
Yeah.
But it's true. If you think about it, it's virtually true. Okay. But again, I'm digressing. Back to you.
No, that's a wonderful digression. So basically when you see deradicalization, it's basically to extinguish the fire of rage, extinguish the fire of fighting for human rights. That's what deradicalization
It basically means eradicating any resistance. This is what it means, nothing else.
100%. 100%. All right, so now we're going to move to number 2. We're going to analyze, and it is Israeli Arab. I cannot stand this term. And I was watching, he's a professor, and he's usually talking about like pro-Palestinian things, and he's dedicated his life to pro-Palestine and that sort of thing. But he called himself an Israeli Arab. And I was like, why would you do that?
Who? Which professor?
Oh, I cannot say.
Why not?
I cannot say after I've thrown him under the bus. But I just don't understand why you would say Israeli Arab. But I mean, maybe he just wanted to say that he lived in Israel proper. I don't know. But nonetheless, I do not like this term. So Israeli Arab refers to the Palestinians who were not forcibly displaced and who ended up staying in the 1948 territories, especially Haifa or Akka, these kinds of places. And so that's why I don't like the word, because you're Palestinian. Why would you call yourself an Israeli?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a number of issues with this. The first is that Arab has 2 meanings. One, it's a linguistic group, and the other one is you're from Arabia. And when you say you're an Israeli Arab and the nationality of Israel is Jewish, what are you saying here? You don't have any nationality at this point because you're not calling yourself Palestinian. Israeli is not a recognized nationality in Israel itself. And all you have is a linguistic group that ties you to Arabia. So it takes away your claim to the land. And the original language of Palestinians and everyone from the Levant was Syriac, Aramaic. And so even that, it reduces your history and says that your history starts in the 7th century. So what happens is your history then becomes reduced or truncated so that it begins in the 7th century when Palestine was Arabized. And so I don't like that either. So this whole term Israeli Arab, it takes away the Palestinian as a people, the Palestinian as a homeland, the Palestinian as a political identity. And as I said, historical continuity becomes truncated. You start at the 7th century rather than the thousands of years of Palestinian history that preceded that. Another thing too is that when you call yourself an Arab and it's just a linguistic group, it becomes a monolith. And people don't understand that Palestine is a nation, which means there are many languages, just like in any other nation, many different distinct cultural groups, religious groups. And to provide just a linguistic monolith that is very vague and takes away from the homeland, it also erases what makes a Palestinian person Palestinian. And I remember I saw Charlie Kirk asking a student on campus what makes a Palestinian a Palestinian. And the student even, he wasn't from Palestine, so he didn't have a response, but he just kept saying, well, they're Arab, right? Well, they're Arab. And I want to be like, we're Levantines, we're, Plato, cartography, Jesus, we have done so much. We've been the center of all of Western empires, Roman Empire, the Hellenic Empire, and even in the Umayyad empires, right? So when the Damascus was the capital and Palestine was part of that empire, and we were part of so much just because of our geography, not necessarily because of anything else, but because of our geography and because of our what we could produce philosophically and that sort of thing. So what makes a Palestinian a Palestinian? It's the claim to the land. It's the claim to the history. And when you take that away and you call yourself an Israeli Arab, Israel, which was started in 1948, and the Arabization, which started in the 7th century, it's very misleading. And you forget, there was something called Palestine. And there is something called Palestine with unique dialect, with unique history, with unique culture that's different than, let's say, Saudi Arabia, or different than, let's say, a North African country like Morocco. So those are the things that this linguistic trap, I feel, it evokes, right? It just takes away the peoplehood and the history and the claim to the homeland.
Most Americans can't make the distinction. They think even Iranians are Arabs.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, you see those interviews sometimes on YouTube. Against whom did America fight the War of Independence? Mexico? Canada? Yeah, seriously. I mean, students.
Well, yeah, and I think that the discourse is a huge part of it because, what do people say? Oh, Palestinians belong in the desert, or they're a desert people. What desert are you talking about? Palestine is the Fertile Crescent. And if I say I'm from Palestine, people automatically assume Middle East. If I say I'm from Israel, they automatically assume Europe, even though it's the exact same geographical location. And that's because of the discourse. This whole desert thing, it's because they want people to think you're from Arabia, that you're not from the Fertile Crescent. And then they want you to think that Palestinians are not native to what they call Israel. They want you to feel like you have been imported there or implanted there. And that's why you see that they try to link it with the discourse of illegal immigrants, always. And I always say, well, if you hate immigrants so much, you should support Palestine because they don't want to be immigrants. They're staying on their land and they're saying, no, I don't want to leave. I don't want to be an immigrant. And the European Jews are the immigrants. But again, the cognitive dissonance is there. So I'm going to move on from that one because I think that I have talked about all of the things that I want. Actually, from a psychological function, I will talk about this one. When you talk about yourself as an Israeli Arab, then a Palestinian would have to adopt the colonizer's grammar, and you would have to adopt an identity that has been shaped for you by the colonizer, meaning that you are saying, yes, I am of a lower class, I am of a lower caste, and I am not of this land, and my identity is only my language, meaning I'm kind of like homeless. I don't have a home. I only have a language. Which is quite sad because anyone can learn Arabic. So, I just feel like it's so sad because then you're just disconnecting yourself from even having a homeland. You're just floating around. Yeah, so I feel like it's just a mental architecture that shapes public discourse, and to the point where people don't understand what Palestine is. You just become an Arab, you become disconnected from the land. You don't have you don't have political personhood. So if you look at the Balfour Declaration, it says that the Jews from Europe would get political rights, and the natives would get social rights. And so from the get-go, the two-state solution, because the 1947 UN resolution was supposed to be the two-state solution, it never allowed for political autonomy or political rights for Palestinians. Never. It was always, you can have civil rights. For example, you can work, right? You can pay taxes, but you cannot have your own system of governance, and you cannot have your own elections willy-nilly and have your own trade or any of that kind of stuff.
Concerning refugees, what you just said, Noam Chomsky told me that, and I had to think about it when he said it. He told me that the very existence of the state of Israel is the epitome of racism.
Absolutely.
So but it's true. Because nobody else, no, it's not only that nobody else wanted the Jews, they wanted to ensure that they're not coming, especially this big wave from Russia. That's basically the reason why, and coming back to the Balfour Declaration, they were absolutely racist.
For sure. Yeah, there was no vagueness about it. At all times, the idea was to take over Palestine, the whole thing, and to disenfranchise Palestinians from a political standpoint, so that they could never have autonomy, they could never have the independence that they were promised. So this actually leads quite nicely to term number 3, which is the two-state solution, which I'm going to tie in with the UN stabilization force. So this term is actually like a masterpiece of bureaucratic illusion. It is a great way to dangle the carrot in front of a group of people and keep moving it forward just to buy time. And meanwhile, in the background, all of the things that you think you're getting is being gobbled up. And so this is the two-state solution. So if you hear anyone, supporting the two-state solution, know that they are either disingenuous about being a supporter of Palestinians, or they just don't know better, because the two-state solution is a disaster and was designed to be one. And so if we look at history, for example, South Africa with the Bantustans, yes, they gave them a flag. Yes, they gave them anthems and mini parliaments and even presidents like Mahmoud Abbas. Right? So you can have all of these symbolic things that would point to some sort of autonomy or authority, but they really have no teeth, they have no power, and at the end of the day, they mean nothing, because when the colonizer wants to come and occupy you, there's nothing you can do. You don't have an army, you don't have political currency, you don't even have social currency, and the people that are installed in these positions, more often than not, don't want. Right? They don't want to do anything other than get a paycheck. And if ish hits the fan, they're happy to take their suitcases and leave somewhere else.
It's maybe worth noting that we know from Ben Gurion's own letters to his son that he never intended to accept the two-state solution. So he wrote to his son that he accepts the partition, meaning the two-state solution, only as a means to an end. Yeah, and he wanted to build on that piece by piece. So that was never, And if you look at today, if someone, a politician even, people, educated people, if they talk about two-state solution, they don't think it's true. How, if you agree today with Israel, okay, we implemented two-state solution, how would that look like? A Swiss cheese in the West Bank, right? With all those settlers, How de facto would that look like? I have one scenario, of course, in my mind, what the Belgians did in Congo. Bad stuff was happening there, right? So we might look at something like that, independent from the fact that, we have now 250,000, how shall we call them, those settlers, those brandishing, killing, burning troops of almost like wild dogs, burning everything, killing everybody. I mean, we saw documentaries, also clips from in the night. They spread and destroy everything, protected by the army, right?
Yeah.
So
They're
two-state
absolute
solution.
vermin. Yep.
Two-state solution. If a politician talk about two-state solution today, it's sand in the eyes, or smoke in the mirror, however you want to call it. Yeah.
100%, because in the end of the day, the Palestinian state will be economically strangled, militarily contained, controlled from every border, right? You have no claim to other parts of the land. So even the idea of the right of refugees returning, you no longer have, like, for example, my family were from Haifa. Well, Haifa's not part of the two-state solution, so...
Do you know Benny Morris, by any chance?
I
Benny
do,
Morris?
yes.
I interviewed him. And when we come to the topic of, right of return, he says, I mean, Benny Morris is exceptional in a number of ways, especially because he made a U-turn. He criticized his own earlier work, right? I mean, yeah. But he said, look, then Israel would no longer be a Jewish state overnight. And I don't want that. Yeah. So it was an interesting interview for a number of reasons.
Oh yeah, no, he's as you said, he's exceptional in many ways that make him infamous. But so for example, you have to give up your rights, right? You have to give up the right that everyone else has to the right of return as a refugee. You have to give that up for the two-state solution. And then when they say things, it will no longer be a Jewish state, they always mean European Jewish, because they sure as hell don't care about Palestinian Jews. And sometimes I like to make a joke and say they don't care about Arab Jews except for maybe Ben Gvir, because he's
That's
from
my
Iraq.
point. This is where I wanted to go with the story about Avi Schleim.
Yeah.
This is an internal fault line, an internal friction, because you have those different kind of Jews within Israel, and they are not all that friendly with each other. You have the European descendants, which kind of ruled up until not so long ago. Now, this power dynamic is changing. Yeah.
Yep. 100%. So, they keep saying, oh, it won't be Jewish. No, you mean it won't be European, is what you're saying. And yeah, it won't be European. So what? You go back to your continent. You have a big, beautiful continent. Go back to that one if you're worried about lack of Europeanness. But of course, we all know that it's a military base, and as an economic hub, it's not really about European.
An unsinkable supercarrier in the Middle East. That was Joe Biden, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Well said, Joe Biden. These two-state solution ideas I really don't like is basically saying that we're going to map you out a prison, but you are going to agree to it, and that's the difference. So no, I don't believe in the two-state solution at all. As we said, meanwhile, the settlements are expanded, the land is transferred, they sell the land to Brooklyn Jews, American Jews.
Rich Siegel, do you know him?
I don't.
He's American. I spoke to him. He infiltrated Jewish synagogues where in the basement they are selling land in the West Bank.
It's so sad. They even have, like real estate signs in front of, Zionist buildings saying,
In synagogues, they're selling land in the West Bank. Yeah.
And so this is how they reshape their demographics, because demographics is very important to them. So that if they can show that, okay, most everyone is European Jewish, then, it becomes like facts on the ground. It becomes ipso facto, it's a Jewish state. But if there's non-European Jews, then that becomes a demographic issue. Like, how can you justify the physical presence of non-European Jews? And so, of course, they try with rhetoric, they try with propaganda, but at the end of the day, they want those people out because they do become a quote-unquote nuisance when they resist their enslavement. So this is the two-state solution. It's a gradualism trap, or they say, oh yeah, don't worry, next year or at the next UN meeting or at the next, when we convene. And I even remember in January of this year, so almost a year ago, Saudi Arabia and France had written a letter saying that they were going to create a plan for the recognition of Palestine. And I tried to get in touch with a lot of people to discuss this with them, but I didn't get any traction on it. But then when this whole, Saudi and France came out more publicly in August of this year, talking about their plan. Everyone thought it was in response to public pressure, but they had been planning this all along. It had nothing to do with public pressure. And the whole recognition thing is part of the gradualism trap, where they keep pushing things with bureaucratic procedures or with voting that means nothing, as we see people not using their vetoes when they should be using vetoes, so on and so forth. So it's the wait because something better is going to come, but this wait just means it's not coming. It just means never. And we've seen this even...
At that time, they still wanted to normalize, I believe, yeah. But not so long ago, about 2 months ago, it was exactly the weekend when I was in Malta, interviewing the former foreign minister of Malta, who has a very lucid view on this situation.
Oh, wow.
But at that very weekend, a couple of countries, I believe 4 or 5 countries, in addition to the other 130 or so countries, which was a surprise for me because I didn't know that many countries already had recognized Palestine as a state. So a couple of more countries recognized Palestine as a state. But then the question, of course, is the same as before. What exactly are they recognizing? What Palestine? Today? 1967? 1948? What? There is no clear discussion even, not even... the beginnings of a discussion. What are we actually recognizing? Yeah. So this is just...
I'm sorry, I get too excited. I apologize, Thomas. One of the things that they knew and they come out and they say is that Palestinians need hope. And so I believe they sell hopium, right? So the opium of the people is the hopium. And so they keep telling you, oh, there will be a state and don't worry. But at the end of the day, if you really are interested in human rights, you would know that you wouldn't want a two-state solution. You would want your country decolonized and you would want your human rights recognized just as they are for most of the world. I'm not going to say the whole world because there's a lot of people suffering, not just the Palestinians. So this whole two-state solution, is kind of asking you to compromise on your human worth. And I don't accept that. So, no, I don't believe in their waiting games. We've seen that with the civil rights movement where, they just keep saying, wait, wait, wait. But at the end of the day, even with Martin Luther King, the movement didn't really have an impact until there was action, direct action, and giving up on the whole wait and see, or eventually, or just believe in the system, or trust the process and that kind of stuff. And we do see people now becoming more aware of the illusion of the UN and also the illusion of having autonomy within a very banker-controlled global system, where I believe even countries like China and Russia are so economically tied to, doesn't have to be the West, but economically tied to certain economic practices and systems and pipelines that make their economies dependent on certain political moves. And so I think that this is forcing people to look deeper than I don't know. It's like you always want to call it a chess game, but it's much worse than that. Like I think we were talking earlier and you were telling me about the control is a lot worse than people imagine. And yeah, it is. It's not just worse for us as individual citizens, but I believe that it's much worse for countries and nations as well. When the machine of usury and of Western banking and of even the Abraham Accords, when they put their tentacles into your systems and make your pipelines dependent on another pipeline, you become dependent on the politics and interests of those countries that own those pipelines. So yeah, I do believe that things are a lot worse than we think, and our analysis cannot be as simple as kind of reminiscing of the USSR or China 50 years ago, because unfortunately those countries don't exist the way they used to.
Keyword bank. I will do a piece on this. BIS, Bank for International Settlement. It's a powerful organization which basically is an entity with their own laws, with war or no war. They dealt with left and right. So it's a very interesting. So if someone is interesting, check it out. BIS, Bank for International Settlement. You will not believe it, what you find.
I'm going to take a look at that. That sounds really fascinating. So again, the two-state solution is just an illusion of progress. It means maintaining global consensus while the theft continues, and it creates a mental model of balance. When you hear two-state solution, you feel justice for some reason, and it also absolves people of their responsibility to take action, because you think, oh, the two-state solution is coming. The UN will take care of it, or I'm not going to take sides because you have this on one hand and you have that on the other hand, and I'm sure things will work out between them, when really it's not a one side versus another side. It's one has the boot on the other, and this boot came from outside, and that should be really scary to people, that an external force can come and put their boot on your neck and then start talking about it as if you resisting suffocation is radical, you resisting suffocation is violent or immoral, or you fighting off the boot off your neck is somehow a symmetrical and equal force to the colonizer's boot on your neck. So this is another issue with the two-state solution. It creates a mental model in your mind that there's two equal forces and they're just fighting over land, and they both have equal claim and they both have equal force. And so this leads me now to the UN stabilization force. So this is a perfect case study of what I'm talking about, especially for discourse analysis. So after the genocide, the genocide continues in Gaza, the UN's recommendation to introduce this international stabilization force, which of course we know is an international occupying force, it performs the same linguistic function as the two-state solution. So Gaza, which is the victim, becomes unstable. It becomes needing, or it becomes the problem, and it needs to be supervised, like a child, very infantilized. And the perpetrators, the Zionists, they become regional actors with autonomy and moral, they have the right way of thinking and the moral way of thinking, and they are fit to make decisions for the victims. And so they are the ones who participate in the peace process, whereas the people in Gaza are excluded from that. And this is the same logic that we see in all colonial discourse. We are on a civilizing mission. The French is a protectorate for certain parts of Africa. Or, even the same thing when I talked about Kenya, the stabilization forces in Kenya, they all come out and they pretend that they are the ones who are going to bring peace. And the issue is the people who resist. And the people who perpetrate it, they're doing the tough love, right? So that's the UN force, the UN stabilization force. It's just, again, another way to blame the victims and another way to normalize colonization. All right.
The next one is the interesting one.
Oh yes, Israel has the right to defend itself. So this is a big one, you're right. So this phrase is not merely a political slogan, it is the entire ideology in a few words. It is the architecture of Zionism itself. And it is built to collapse an empire's offensive. Their actions, it's a way to create it as something moral. That's why they call their army the most moral armies, because they know they're not moral. So then they have to keep tricking you like, okay, all this ugliness that you're going to see, it's moral. Oh, okay, so maybe God just works in mysterious ways. Maybe bad things are actually good. And maybe the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And so they use this kind of like opposite language a lot. And so they know that they're not defending themselves. They know that it's an offensive.
When I say to people that this is one of, Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. And I had a speech in Jordan, so I said, this is one of the most brilliant slogans that I've ever heard. And people look at me with large eyes. What? Yeah, brilliant. It's an intergenerational slogan and it still works. And it's absolutely pulled out of thin air.
Absolutely.
A land without people for a people without land, and the most moral army of the world. These two slogans, I do not know if we in human history have two better slogans. Well, it's maybe too big to say, but in the last 100 years, I do not know of two better slogans.
I agree with you. And then because they make it so moral, what do we see? We see people in Israel protesting the right to rape. Because now rape is also moral. Why? Because the most moral army participates in that. So any action that the most moral entity takes must thereby be moral and righteous. And so you cannot penalize somebody who is on the pedestal of morality for the things that they do, because they're the most moral. So it's very powerful. I agree with you. And it sanctifies the colonizers' violence. Yep.
Apologies. Before we move on, you said the rape.
Yes.
Now we all saw those images where Israeli soldiers gang rape Palestinian prisoners. After this came out, there was a debate in the Knesset where they seriously discussed to kind of formalize torture and rape in the treatment of Palestinian prisoners. I mean, in any other era of time, if any other country, it doesn't matter Israel or who, any North Korea or I don't know what, yeah, if anyone would discuss this on public television to institutionalize rape of prisoners, I mean, where's the ICC? Where's the ICJ, right?
The
Again,
ICC and the ICJ are also raping prisoners because they're all garbage, they're all Zionists, they're all colonizers, and they all have a role to play. So yeah, all of them are corrupt. I don't believe, and I'm talking about people in high places, not, the lower, UN representative. But I mean, the ones that have any kind of decision-making power, yeah, they're out there raping prisoners and cheering on rape and genocide, just like the rest of the Zionists, right? So it is a global issue, just like Francesca Albanese said. Like she said, this is an international crime of genocide, not a localized one. So yeah, it's much bigger than we think. So moving back on to Israel has the right to defend itself, it's basically saying Israel has the right to destroy you, because if we don't destroy you, you will destroy us. Why will you destroy us? Because we're raping, we're pillaging, we're stealing your land, we're treating you like slaves. So you will resist, you will fight back. Well, if you're fighting me, and I kill you first, oh, that's self-defense. So this is how they think of it. And the reason why they think of it in this way is because they believe that they have the right to go into any land, claim it as theirs, because they are the chosen ones. And anyone who says, no, you're not, or denies, because that becomes blasphemy. And if you look at any blasphemy laws, they're all punishable by death. Right? Death and torture and stoning. So they consider it blasphemy. Like, if you don't let me have a claim to this land, if you don't let me play God on this land, this is blasphemy, and it is in my right to punish you violently by death, by any means necessary, because I'm defending my truth, which is I am God on this earth, or I'm God's viceroy on this earth. I am the chosen one. And anyone who denies me this is an aggressor. And I must defend myself against this aggressor. And so when they see people saying, no, this is my land, they see this as an existential threat. They say, okay, as long as you're here and you're not letting me do what I want, that's a threat to me, because I've defined myself as somebody who has the right to do whatever I want. And you are standing in the way of that. And we see this settler history of self-defense. It's part of the colonial project. Again, it's part of the colonial discourse. And we see it in the United States when it said that it was defending itself against the indigenous people of the plains. They used that term, defending itself. France said it was self-defense when it was killing Algerians in Algeria. The Britons said they were using defense while torturing Kenyans in the 1950s.
Or India.
Exactly, right? And South Africa also said they were engaging in self-defense when they were suppressing the black uprisings under the apartheid. So yes, this type of violence is always framed as protective. I must go in there and kill these people who threaten my identity. And anyone whose identity feels like it's under threat, that is the most visceral reaction people have. I know even when I speak about some certain topics, even though I might quote unquote be on that person's side, but I say something that's not exactly how they see themselves, it gets really heated really fast, because identity is the most important things that your ego and your superego is going to protect, which is why identity politics is very important. Yep.
The positive face and the negative face, yeah, but that's a different topic. But if I read Israel has the right to defend itself, yeah, there is a preposition in there that Israel was attacked. Now, first of all, Israel has the right to defend itself is again one of a very good slogan, and we have heard it a million times. This is really ingrained. Any Sabra and Shatila happen, Israel has to defend itself. Yeah? So if we peel this back, yes, there was an attack on October the 7th. Yes, there were rockets throughout the last 75 years. Yeah, but this is a perfect example of kind of putting history upside down in one single sentence. Because Israel is not the victim here, right? Israel was created in 1948 based on ethnic cleansing, 500 villages destroyed, and it was planned and very well prepared, right? So if we take this, Israel has the right to defend itself. From what? And from when? Is there not the same right to defend for defense on the other side? Right? Because those are the real victims. I always try to make this point when I talk to people who are kind of, I mean, you can't talk to people who are totally Zionist, yeah, but you have some people that are kind of in the middle, and this field is actually growing, yeah. I tell them, look, you're home tonight, like I'm home right here, right now. Suddenly some mad juveniles, 12 to 16 years, come here, kick in the door, burn my house, burn everything here, beat my wife, whatever, or kill us. The army just stands by. How would you feel? And if this happened 75 years long, how would you feel? So who has the right to defend him or herself? Right? Most of the time when I say this, then there is silence.
Because those people have some sort of logic still, but a Zionist would say, well, what were you doing there in the first place? And they always say that. Like, I remember, gosh, it must have been about 20 years ago when there was the Jenin massacre. I think there was 6,000 people who were killed in Jenin in just maybe 2 days, something like that. It was very horrible. And, the Zionist Jews just kept saying, well, what were they doing there? They shouldn't have been there when the tanks came, when the bombs were there. What were they doing there? And so they... that's how it always is with them. Like, you shouldn't be on our land. You being on that land is the aggression, right? And so everything that we do to get you off the land is self-defense, because we're protecting our land from you. And because when we talk about Israeli Arab, so they always see them as foreigners. Oh, you should just go F off to Saudi Arabia or something like that. And, as a Palestinian, of course, that's so offensive on so many levels. A, we're not from Arabia, we're from Palestine, we're ethnically Levantines, our history is in the Eastern Mediterranean. We didn't come anywhere. The Arabs came and Arabized us, not the other way around. And another thing, too, if you look, at Saudi Arabia, they are not a friend to Palestine. So anyway, that's a different topic. But it's definitely, when they say self-defense, it's defending the domination. Right? It's defending the colonial force and the colonial presence is what it is. I'm defending the colonial presence. Do I want to talk about anything else? All right. So then what happens? We hear the Palestinians are called security threats. And so when you look at any of these stupid peace plans or two-state solution, you'll always see what is fore and foremost on paper. It's the security of Israel. And then they say the dignity of Palestinians. We are going to create a two-state solution that ensures the security of Israel, which means ensures the colonial project and the enslavement of Palestinians, but we're going to ensure the dignity of Palestinians. And to them, the dignity means you're going to have food, so you don't have to beg. You're going to have a tent or some sort of shelter over your head.
Subsistence.
Yeah,
Minimal
exactly.
subsistence.
And they consider this dignity. Whereas for us, that's not dignity. As a Palestinian, our human rights is our dignity and our freedom is our dignity. But this is how they throw in these stupid words that they have.
We have one more.
I do. So let's look at this one, right to exist. And this one, of course, means the right to be your master. So whenever you hear Israel has the right to exist, they're basically saying Israel has the right to be your colonial master. And the way they do it is a hierarchical context of existence. So if Israel exists as a colonized or a colonizer, then you must exist under us if you are to exist. Now, if you insist, because we would prefer that you don't exist, but if you must exist, you are going to exist under us. And that is their right to exist. So, because if you tell them one state with equal rights, that is not allowing them to exist as a colonial power. And so when they rebut and say, no, Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state, it means Israel has the right to be your master, to be a colonial state in which you either do not exist or you exist under us. And so this is an ontological supremacy where anyone who wants to buy into it will automatically, without even thinking, believe that Zionist Jews are somehow inherently superior, socially, genetically, whatever you might think, more superior. They are God's chosen people, and therefore it makes sense not to allow anyone into a Jewish state. And if anyone does want to, they would have to be there subservient to the Jewish Zionist system. So again, it goes hand in hand with the right to defend itself. It's a colonial story. And this actually ties in with Van Dyck, who says there are symbolic elites. And this is actually crucial for the right to exist. So media, political leaders, educational institutions like schools and universities, they all reproduce the right to exist as if it is common sense. Oh yeah, Israel has the right to exist. And you see everyone, even the pro-Palestinian movement, like, oh no, I'm not saying that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Or sometimes they'll try to get around it and say, well, no state has the right to exist. People have the right to exist. But what they don't understand is that this is an ontological supremacist narrative that tries to make you feel guilty or make you feel like you're denying the existence of a people by denying the existence of colonial force. See, they try to tie those two things in together. And if you believe that Jewish people are a superior race, then you are saying, okay, if I don't know why you would, but you're saying that I'm less than. And if you have a religious ideology that says Jewish people are, second to God, then you would feel that going against it is somehow immoral or it's sacrilegious, right? Because they sanctify the colonial project. And so what you have is a sort of cognitive obedience to your symbolic elites. You don't know who they are, right? But you know they must exist somewhere. Somewhere there is an elite. And the elites are saying that these people are superior. And because I see them on trusted news networks, because my professor told me, because my teacher told me, I read it in a book or whatever, I saw it on TV, it must be true. And even if you know things that are on TV or that people can lie or there's propaganda in textbooks, as you said, the repetition and in different media and different modes, it becomes so ingrained that you don't even know you take it for granted. It weaponizes your empathy, right? Because you say, oh my God, I don't want to deny the existence of somebody. And so you start thinking these things. Okay, well, there is a moral exceptionality and maybe Jews are the moral exceptionality. The world seems to think so. My society seems to think so. Maybe I'm wrong. And it becomes easier at the end of the day. It becomes easier to reproduce these discourses. It becomes easier to share beliefs that your symbolic elites have given you. And so you unfortunately consent to the supremacy even when you're not aware of it.
I find this one weaker than, let's say, the strongest army in the world. Why? If a state has to claim I have the right to exist, that implies a couple of things. First of all, it implies that there are people who dispute the fact that you have a right to exist. And that, by implication, implies, if that makes any sense, that there might be a chance that they're right. Right? So I find this a very double-sworded slogan to this, so to speak, for Israel. Because there's an undercurrent there that you have to justify your existence. The Dutch don't justify their existence. Canada doesn't justify, we have a right to exist in Canada. I mean, Canada has a right to exist. I think, to my knowledge, that's the only state, Israel, who has this kind of slogan, we have a right to exist. So there is an implication into why are you even questioning your own existence. That's what I mean. For me, that's an indicator that there is, I'm pointing at Israel here, yeah? From Israeli side, this slogan points to me to insecurity. This is my take on this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some of that too, because, you know, for me, there's two Israels. There's Israel, the people who've bought into the propaganda, that they are the chosen ones and that they have some sort of claim to the land. And then there's Israel, the colonial banker project. And so, yeah, there's definitely some of that. But I also think, on the other hand, it's to show that they have extra rights that other people don't, or other nations don't have. Iran doesn't have the right to exist. Canada doesn't have the, you know, because they don't come out and say it. But Israel, you know, all the countries can fall and be erased off the map. As
Syria,
they have,
Lebanon,
right? Yeah.
Yes, they don't have a right to exist.
They don't have the right to exist, but Israel has the right to exist. So no matter what anyone says, you cannot question Israel. So yes, on one hand, it's you know, responding to the questioning, but at the other hand, they're putting it down as exceptionalism, whereas we have the right to exist, and no other nation does. And that's just the way it is. And when you hear them speak, like I've seen Jewish people say, you know, why do you just worship Jesus? You should worship all Jews. You know, so, you know, they have this, you know, in their mind that they are exceptional, that they have more rights than other, that they are above the law.
But of course, when they talk about Jesus, they think about this blonde-eyed, you know, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, white Caucasian person, right?
Yep. Because the Crusaders stole Christianity from Palestine, rebranded it as the Anglican Church, and then came back as the Crusaders to sell it back to us. But anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk about. So we're talking about we have a right to exist, which means we have the right to determine and define existence itself. We have the right to exist, and Palestinians do not have the right to exist. And so that's what it comes down to. And if you want to exist, then you must understand we have the right to be your master. And this is something that Orwell would call doublethink. Unfortunately, it's not fiction. It's definitely part of the political infrastructure. And as you said, it goes through repetition until the domination feels like peace because you've submitted to it, and language itself becomes the occupation. So those were the 5 tropes that I wanted to share with you.
They say, well, we have, I think now, more than 120 cognitive biases identified. Cognitive biases are simply programs in our mind. They react, I said it at the beginning, I believe, they react very quick, but they're not always correct. And one of them is availability bias. That means our brain is lazy, tries to save energy. So whatever is readily available will be used more than abstract concepts. That comes back into the confirmation bias. I mean, these biases, they all, you know, multiply each other, where you virtually see the world through the lens that confirms your beliefs. I mean, there are many scientific research projects who confirm this again and again and again. This is massive, yeah. But I have one more, and I was actually surprised that it's not on a list, and it's one that you have inhaled since I don't know how many years. Israel Palestine conflict.
Oh yeah, they want to create a sort of legitimizing of the colonizers' claim to the land. And so what they want is, I don't know how to explain it, but here in Canada, for example, we have two colonizers that always fight for independence, the British faction and the French faction. And so they're trying to create these two forces that are equal, that perhaps have equal claim to the land and are both fighting for autonomy. And somehow there's a breakdown in the communication, somehow there's a clash of civilization, and therefore it becomes an Israel-Palestine conflict, or as they usually say, Israel-Palestinian conflict, because they will not acknowledge the existence of Palestine. Not that we need them to acknowledge it, because it exists and it has done so for thousands of years. But yeah, so, they don't want to call it an occupation, which is what it is. They don't want to call it a colonial project. They don't want to call it, war crimes or genocides or ethnic cleansing, because it's theirs. And it's something that they want to project moral authority. They want to pretend that they are the civilized, and other people just don't understand, and so it's becomes a conflict, as if I just can't stand it. Like, as if they're not at the same time appropriating Palestinian culture. They adopt a Semitic language. They pretend that hummus is theirs. They, start living in Mediterranean cultures and, doing agriculture in the Mediterranean and that sort of thing. So you adopt the culture at the same time, pretend it's a cultural conflict. Okay, it's just so mind-blowing. So no, it's not a conflict. There is no conflict. It's, somebody comes and attacks you and you say, stop. And that's an aggression. And then that's people saying no, right? And they don't even want you to cry when you say no. It's like, when we come and attack, you better be quiet. Silence. And so what happened with the genocide is that it wasn't quiet. The world heard, after 77 years, the world heard. And so, things are done, in the shadows. No one, claims any of these things. They don't have to work so hard with their propaganda. But when things are exposed, that's when you see them really double down on their propaganda, their hasbara, and of course on the physical and violent forces on the ground. There's a lot of people that I believe, Jewish people, that come out and say that they're against the genocide only because it has been publicized. Because where were you, yelling and hollering about the 1948 genocide, or the 1967, or the 1954, or the 1982, you know what I mean? So a lot of it has to do with what's exposed, what's hidden. And the easiest thing for them to say is, okay, we all know something's going on there. It's a conflict. It has been going on for thousands of years, like Trump tries to tell us, 3,000 years, even though Israel was created in 1948. And so they just try to create something that is normalized, it's ongoing, there's nothing we can do about it. It's like two civilizations clashing. Don't worry, the orange man in the White House will go and do something, and if he can't, then the black guy will come in, the black face of white supremacy might, oh no, that's not working. Maybe a woman will go in. And so they have different faces of Western imperialism that will always go in there to let you know that it's a conflict between two parties that is mysterious, it's complicated, nothing you can do about it, best leave it up to, the peacemakers and the mediators that are all in on it anyway.
In linguistics, order matters. So Israel, Palestine, I completely understand why Netanyahu wants to turn this around. Israel-Palestine conflict is kind of, Israel has a conflict with Palestine. This is what's in the back of subconsciously of people's mind. Israel-Palestine conflict. And then, of course, the word conflict implies some kind of, equality. There is a conflict between two parties, let's say between two armies or whatever. Yeah, which of course, again, subconsciously, a conflict is quite a neutral thing. There is not one side is the Goliath and the other one is the David, as we see in a reversed fashion in Palestine. So again, these three little words are quite powerful. Yeah, much more powerful, I think, than Israel's right to exist.
Well, yeah, you're right. And the fact that they say Israel-Palestine conflict also tries to make it like Palestinians are neighbors, right? Rather than people living on the land and within a system, and that system is called Israel. So the whole issue is convoluted. They try to make it sound like India, Pakistan, or I don't know, was it Armenian, Azerbaijan, or whatever? They try to make it look like neighbors, and sometimes they do say Israel's neighbors. And they're not. They are the colonized people of that land. And the problem is this institution called Israel. It's a colonial project that's built on terrorism and war crimes. And I totally resent the whole conflict, because even just saying that Israel Palestine legitimates Israel as having any claim to the land, which it doesn't.
And maybe a concluding remark here, because it just said terrorists, and that brings up al-Shulani from Syria. So the founding fathers of some of the first Israeli prime ministers were actually on a terrorist watch list, both from the UK and from America. They were des Irgun Haganah Lehi.
Yep.
So we had a number of Israeli prime ministers who are associated with those groups. Yeah? And now we have, of course, the new, president or whatever from Syria, al-Shulani, where, we still have the wanted poster, $10 million on his head, dead or alive. I mean, like in the Wild West. So nothing has changed from before 48 to today. Today you are a terrorist, and tomorrow you're, you got a PR lesson and a makeover, al-Shulani. Yep. I'm not joking. There was an American PR firm, I forgot the name now, yeah? A beard cut, a dress, and now you are shaking hands in the White House. Yeah, congratulations.
Yep. Yeah, playing basketball.
Nothing changed.
Yep.
Okay. Susan, a fascinating discussion. I'm really happy we had the opportunity, and I'm thankful for your time. And I'm sure we only have scratched the surface, right?
Oh, there's always so much more.
Good. Again, I thank you for your time. Before I conclude, anything that is close to your heart that we have not scratched upon?
So much that is close to my heart, but I'm very heartened that there are people like you, Thomas, that platform Palestinian voices and that really engage in these types of topics. So anything close to my heart, it would be Salt Cube Analytics. So thank you so much for having me.
Very kind, very kind. Okay. Thank you for today, and you will hear from me again.
Okay, sounds great. I look forward. Take good care.
Bye-bye.